Hi, I'm Pete McConville. Welcome to my channel. Every couple of months, I put a call out on the community tab of my channel homepage asking you for questions. What would you like to know? I did that about a week ago. A bunch of you have responded. Now I'm answering them. So if you're interested in my thoughts on the things you asked, such as why don't I like the Rolex Submariner, I'll see you after the intro. Okay, first question from Thomas Burnett, who jumped in quickly and did something very common and asked two questions. So the first question is, do I like vintage watches? If so, what kind, what brands, what complications, etc. Yes, Thomas, I love vintage watches. In fact, a major cornerstone of my collection are vintage Alpinas. Alpina is a brand I've got a good connection with. I like who they are. We'll talk about that a little bit later, I think. They also have a deep well of vintage watches which are affordable and accessible and kind of cool. So I've been collecting those really for the last 5 years. That part of my collection is now sort of topping out. I've pretty much got what I want there. And I've recently just started collecting 1960s and 1970s Breitling chronographs, mainly because they are just really fun and funky and cool, whilst at the same time very accessible. Kind of horologically important when I get the automatic versions. And yeah, so that's what I'm collecting at the moment. Your second question is, are there any other types of collecting I do? I think you mean in the horological space, like wristwatches, pocket watches, stopwatches. No, I don't. I can certainly see the attraction, but I've kind of got my hands full with plain old everyday wristwatches. So that's kind of where I am right now. Okay, so Chris Hoyt asks a question which I'm going to struggle to give you a straight answer to, which is, in my experience, what company that I've spoken about offers the best sort of quality to price ratio. That's skating very close to asking questions about bang for buck and value for money, and I don't think about watches in that way. That, for me, that diminishes them as luxury goods and turns them into white goods. So I don't think about watches in terms of value. I said I have a price, I will pay that price, I buy the watches I want that are within my price range. That's it. I will never, under any circumstances, buy a watch I don't really want, but it's just a little bit cheaper than the one I do and represents better value. I just will not ever do that. So I don't think of watches really in terms of value. As I said, that's completely toxic to the notion of luxury to me. But you want an answer, I'll give you the best one I can. If I consider quality broadly in terms of design, fit, finish, execution, dial, case, furniture, movement, performance, history, narrative, authenticity, originality, innovation, all of that is quality, I would say Alpina, because they give you all of that at a remarkably low price. Yes, there are micro brands and Chinese mushroom brands that might match them for bits and pieces and be a little bit cheaper. But if you take that broad issue of quality, there's no one that really gets close. One thing I'll add to that, because I've given you one brand, but now I'll give you a collection. If you want a sort of a collection of watches or a collection of brands that together represent an amazingly competitive idea of quality at a remarkably low price, I would say the entry-level Germans, Zinn, Damasco, Union Glasuta, Mueller Glasuta, Tutima, those guys as a pack are amazingly competitive at their price range, far more so than the Swiss. Now, they do tend to have a much narrower scope of style and design, and they tend to be a bit more formal, so there's every chance that those Germans won't have something for you. But to answer your question where you're kind of asking this value stuff, yeah, the entry-level Germans are very hard to beat. Okay, so now you ask another question about what about if we put price aside and just go for maximum quality? Well, you know what? I've handled some A-Lang and Zona watches, and last weekend I got the opportunity to play with a Platinum Cabaret, and so I would say, like, of the watches I've handled, nothing has come close to a A-Lang and Zona yet. But I think you're asking more about the watches in my wheelhouse, the ones I tend to talk about and handle much more. Okay, in terms of straight up quality, it's a battle between two. It's a battle between Rolex and JLC. In terms of quality of fit, finish, design, all that other stuff I spoke about. Sorry, I think I just hit the mic. All that stuff I spoke about, they're line ball. Ultimately, I'd probably go with JLC out of that purely because they carry a certain, I'm going to murder the French here, a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain specialness that I just don't get from Rolex. That could just be because they just don't make as many watches. So their lack of success in the marketplace is helping them in this tiny little competition that has no real value. Chris comes in with a second question. No, I'm a dive watch guy, but do I like dress watches? Yes, I do. I don't have a lot, but I've got some. I love vintage dress watches that have taken a bit of a beating, maybe a bit of damage here and there, and then sticking them on a NATO. There's something really kind of sort of iconoclastic about that I really like. If I am going to go for something new, I like, yes, dressy watches, but ones that are kind of on the edge of maybe being a bit more than a dress watch. So the best example I could give would be something like a Vacheron Constantin 56. It's a dress watch, but I think it can be a little bit more. A JLC sector dial falls into that same sort of nether region. That's, for a modern new watch, that's probably where my dress sensibility is. Okay, Steve Fox asks a question. At what point does a micro brand stop being a micro? You know what? I'd add that to that a little bit and say it's also, that word brand is also important. At what point does a micro, small, brand, i.e. just a brand, stop being that? I don't think it is a point. I think there's kind of an accumulation of factors which tip you over the edge. Some of the things you've spoken about, production numbers and number of employees, absolutely. You start producing more than, pick a number, 2,000 or 3,000 watches a year, you've got more than 10 employees, you're probably not micro anymore. Some of the other things I'd consider is, do you have stock? Do you have inventory, or are you still relying on a pre-order, pre-sale type deal? For me, micro brands tend to be down that pre-order space. If you've got like standing inventory, if you're manufacturing in batches versus got a kind of series production going on, add all those together and you sort of take a guess on whether you still count as micro or you've become macro. I think there's also some issues around being a brand versus a maker. I think where you see people who are very reliant on other people to do a lot of the manufacturing, maybe all of the manufacturing, all of the logistics, maybe even a great chunk of the design, then I think you're in micro brand territory. When you start branching out from that and you are taking much more of the sort of the design, the prototyping, or God forbid, getting your hands dirty, like say Anordain, and you're actually manufacturing the key component of their watch, which is the enamel dial, then I think you're stepping out of the idea of being just a brand and you're becoming something else. I think there's a lot of brands, and I'd say like Anordain, that for convenience sake, we call micro brands, but in my mind, I think they're much more like independent watchmakers. Which brings me to an interesting question from Chris Stevenson. He asks, do I think that Chinese watches have shown how overpriced many watches from established brands are? I can see where you're coming from, but no, I do not think that they have shown that. The watches coming from the established brands, I think you mean mainly the Swiss, the Germans, the Japanese, like Seiko, that they're overpriced. No, I don't think that's what they've shown at all. I think what they have shown is something that we don't understand. and that is that manufacturing is easy and cheap. It is not hard to manufacture a watch. What is hard is designing it. What is hard is telling a story and coming up with a narrative and then marketing that watch and making us want it. That's hard. Very few people can do that, and it costs a lot of money, and we don't like paying for it. So what a lot of people like and are perfectly happy with and almost encourage is for Chinese brands to steal all of that, to piggyback off the back of it, just do the easy bit and make huge amounts of profit by just manufacturing other people's designs and piggybacking off all their storytelling and demand building. So no, I don't think the Chinese have shown us that the other watches are overpriced. I think what they have shown us is that we, the community, have zero clue about how easy and cheap manufacture is and how hard design is. Hubsy Stoopsy, I hope I said that right, Stoopsy, asked another double banger question. What's my favourite watch and what is my most worn watch? I can't split two from my most favourite watch. So my Dornblüten Zone World Timer, handmade by a father and son out of Germany, specifically for me, to the design, to the specs I wanted, with this amazing finishing and incredible attention to detail, is my most special watch and my favourite. But I've also got an IWC RAF Pilot's Watch Automatic, made specifically by IWC in conjunction with an RAF pilot to celebrate the Royal Australian Air Force's centenary. That watch was only available to serving members and former members. I'm a serving member of the Royal Australian Air Force. I was able to get this watch. It's a fantastic watch, and it's a totem of the 35-something years I've spent in the military. I can't separate those two. One is a very special watch because of what it is as a watch. One is a very special watch to me because of its historical and personal meaning to me. I can't split those. What's the most worn watch in my collection? This was hard for me to answer. I went back and had a look at my Instagram. Turns out my most worn watch is almost certainly my Breitling Super Ocean 44 Ironman Limited Edition, which in a way makes no sense. That's a 44mm dive watch with a kind of funky dial on a red rubber strap. It's the antithesis of versatile. And yet, it gets probably more wrist time than any other watch I've got. And if I look at where I wear it to work, I wear it doing pretty much anything. Formal, informal, professional, what I'm doing at home, it can cover it all. So either that says something about my total lack of sense of style, or maybe the idea that we keep thinking that for a watch to be versatile, it's got to be a bit dull, a bit muted. Maybe that's not true. Maybe in 2022, watches that are a little bit more out there are just as versatile as a plain watch that's pretty generic on a straight up steel bracelet. Okay, so Pay898 asks the question, what do I think about having a stainless steel watch and having a precious metal version of that? I think what you're talking about here is like if I've got like a stainless steel sports watch, like a dive watch, and I'm also making like a gold version of that. Or maybe you're thinking, what if I have like a steel dress watch and also make a gold watch? But I think you're talking about the first one. And I'm sorry if I've got that wrong. Okay, if I'm thinking about an individual watch, I don't care. I think it's fantastic when brands offer us choice. I hate brands that dictate to us that we have to accept very limited catalogs. That kind of annoys me. Having said that, I do think that the balance of steel and precious metals across a catalog is something that brands need to think about pretty carefully. I'll give you an example. So if we think about a brand like Zinn, they're very tool focused, very technical, very hard edged, very, very focused. Now, if they turned up tomorrow with a gold 104 and a gold 556, I don't think anyone would care. I don't think that would diminish the way we look at their collection or who they are or how it messages. That's still Zin. But if we were 10 years down the track and we'd had no new steel watches, but we'd just been getting lots and lots of like precious metal variations of the steel watches, which weren't really moving, and we woke up one day and saw that every steel watch was now matched with a two-tone or platinum or gold watch, I suspect we would be looking at Zin differently. They wouldn't be that hard-edged technical brand anymore. They'd be something else. So, as I said, I think on an individual by watch basis, great, go for your life. But I would caution brands on a catalog basis. You really want to be careful how far you go, and you want to do this very consciously, being aware of what you might be doing to your overall brand reputation. Okay, Stephen Barnes asks a question: How do I go about deciding my next watch and sourcing it? I'm going to start at the back of that question. How do I source it? 8 times out of 10, it will be on Chrono 24. A lot of my watches are a little bit less obvious. They're a little bit off the beaten track. I find Chrono 24 is the best resource for finding the kinds of watches I'm into. I've also bought something like 40 watches from Chrono 24. Every single transaction has been utterly seamless. I find it very easy to use, and I find all the other tools that come with it about like searches, notepads, etc. really helpful. So yeah, 8 out of 10 times I'm using Chrono 24. For the others, it's a mishmash of ADs and dealers I know, etc. Okay, so that's sourcing it. In terms of deciding what I want to buy, I am a collector. I don't flip watches. I don't buy and sell watches. I am building a collection. I know what I want that to be. I have a list of watches that I am looking out for. Each reference has a search running consistently on Chrono 24, and I check that every now and then to see what's around, what I can afford, what's in my price range, what conditions it's in, all that sort of thing. In terms of choosing the watch I'm going to buy next, it is mostly driven by, if I turn to my collection and look at it, where do I think there's a gap? So I might look into a part of my collection that's got a lot of dive watches and say, I've got a lot of silver, I've got a lot of black, I've got some blue, even got the odd red, but I don't have a green. So I might say that'll make me think that the next dive watch I buy, I really want to have a green dial. I will look into my list. Do I have one that I want? Hint, there is a green dialed watch I'm after. Therefore, that'll come to the top of my pecking order. That's likely to be the next one I buy. There is a rider on that. Some of the watches I want are very rare. They only pop up very occasionally. So if I see that one of those pops up out of nowhere and becomes available, I'll reshuffle the order so that I can grab that. Likewise, if a watch pops up and it's suddenly like $2,000 cheaper than I've seen it before, I'll reshuffle my order and maybe jump on and take advantage of that offer. That's pretty much how I source and how I decide my next watch. Jonathan Robinson asks, what are my thoughts on the new Longines Zulu Time GMT? I love that watch. I think it's fantastic. I really like the Spirit collection generally. I think it does a great job of being a retro cued but still modern watch. It doesn't descend into being a pastiche of kind of vintage ideas just all jammed together looking out of place. I think it does a really good job of picking very specific retro elements and then synthesizing that into a primarily modern look. At the time the Spirit collection came out, I said I thought it was fantastic because it kind of builds a bridge between the Rolex modern stuff and their master collection and the heritage stuff that the watch enthusiast community was so nuts over. And I continue to believe that. I think the Zulu Time continues being that bridge between their heritage collection and their modern stuff. Okay, so Todd S. has asked a question. Aside from Breitling, what's my favourite brand? I don't really have a favourite brand. Even Breitling is one I just tend to talk about because they're doing a lot. So they tend to just come up a lot. But I won't say aside from Breitling, but I'll say as well as Breitling, my 5 favourite brands would be Alpina, Mueller Glasuta, Jaeger-LeCoultre, and IWC. Why those 4? What's the common thread that runs through them? I suppose to start with, all 4 brands have a really authentic feeling origin story, like a superhero. You've got to have a sense of where they came from. And they feel authentic to me. They don't feel confected. There's just something about the way those were created that, as I say, really grabs me. I like their history and their story. I like that all of those brands have taken near fatal punches to their head. They've all been knocked to the canvas and had to drag themselves back into the fight. That's just something I like in a brand. When I was working with cars, it was one of the reasons I was always really excited and liked working with Lancia, because that's that kind of brand. I think all of the brands kind of embody and carry characteristics and ideas of who they are, and that appeal to me. So yeah, those 4 brands, those other brands are sort of my favourite: Alpina, Mueller Glasuta, IWC, and Jaeger-LeCoultre. Okay, so Stavros Katspor asks a question. Hope I said that right, Stavros. I apologise if I murdered it. What time is it now in Australia, on the off chance that you get to watch this as I am giving it, with a time shift in the middle? It is now 6:10 on a Friday afternoon, so we'll see how we go. More seriously, you asked me a question, sort of my hot take, and even there I think you were being a little bit fun, but a hot take on Christian from Theo Harris on his video on behalf of Breitling, and then his sort of follow-up open letter to George Kern. I wasn't sure what to make of the first thing. Beautifully made, wonderfully shot, nice story. Unsure what it had to do with Breitling. The whole time I'm watching this, I just felt like, I'm not sure why you're telling me this story, Christian, and what's this, these arbitrary lingering shots on a very, very nice watch, but it didn't kind of make sense to me. So that was the first thing. And then when I saw your follow-up, when I saw Christian's follow-up, I felt like I was watching a guy criticizing a brand that he knows nothing about and that he hasn't really been watching. I felt like he was talking to a Breitling of 10 years ago, and he's kind of missed everything that's happened in the last 10 years. Okay, so Penny from All in Her Movements has asked the question, nothing to do with watches, but what attracted me to my line of work? Really quick backtrack, what is my line of work? I'm an engineering officer in the Royal Australian Air Force. I'm an aeronautical engineer. I work primarily in aviation safety assurance. I'm going to answer you, Penny, in sort of 2 bites. First bite, what attracted me to this? What got 18-year-old Pete McConville in the Air Force? That was very prosaic. They would pay me to go to university, and that made life much easier for me and my family. Having me stay at home would have been stressful. It enabled me to leave home, which was great. And at the time, we're talking like the mid-1980s, there was a lot of economic turmoil in Australia. Every day there were stories about how uni graduates couldn't get jobs and were lining up to work at fast food restaurants. And the idea that someone would pay me to go to university, would pay me to move out of home, and would then also guarantee me a job when I graduated, I just said, sign me up. So why the Air Force and not the Army or the Navy? Well, the Army just has way too much walking, and who would work on ships when you get to work on aeroplanes? So yeah, the Air Force was the obvious answer. Okay, so that does a decent job of explaining why an 18-year-old Pete McConville joined the RAF in the mid-80s. Why am I still here 30-something years later? Primarily, it's for 2 reasons, a pragmatic reason and a more philosophical one. Pragmatically, the Air Force has turned out to be a place that suits the way my head works. I get a new job every 2 or 3 years. I'm sort of encouraged to be an inch deep and a mile wide. I get a lot of roles in problem solving and coming up with new ways of doing things, all of which, as I say, suits me down to the ground. Perhaps more philosophically, what I would say is probably working in aviation safety you get to make a difference. Every now and then you get to, stop someone from doing something stupid that was going to get people killed. That's kind of nice. Probably even better is when you help someone do something that they didn't think they were going to be able to do. And in particular, if you're dealing with like transport people, it's like you can fly that extra aid mission. You can get those extra people out of a disaster zone. You can get a hospital in and set up sooner. I don't pretend that, I make the world a better place for everyone, but every now and then you get to make the world a better place for someone. And that's pretty okay. Smooth Acceleration asks me a question I've been dreading answering because it's probably going to upset some people, but, here we go. Why do I dislike the Submariner so much? What are the specific reasons? Okay, first off, I don't hate the Submariner so much. I don't like it. I don't think it's a great watch in some ways. But look, my biggest problem with the Submariner is that it's a Rolex. I've made no secret of the fact I'm not attracted to Rolex. I've made no secret of the fact it's not a brand for me. In 25 words or less, when I think Rolex, I think dead behind the eyes corporate psychopath. If I think when would I wear a Rolex, it would be when I've just taken over a company and I'm going to sack half the workers on Christmas Eve. That's the image of Rolex to me. And that's not something I want associated with me or my story. Now, before you all rage quit, I do not impose my hang-ups. I do not impose my psychological issues on you. If you see, I imagine most of you see something very different in Rolex, see something much more healthy and much more just better. All power to you. Collect Rolexes to your heart content. I don't care. I'm not trying to convince you that Rolex is anything different to you see. I just see something different and I don't want to be associated with it. Okay, so now talking about the Rolex Submariner itself. Okay, in many ways, it's a fantastic watch. It is very well made. It is very well spec'd. I understand it is very comfortable. For those of you who are into bracelets, it's got the best bracelet in the business. Fantastic movement. None of that's in dispute. It is a good watch. But as midwives will talk about, there's a little phrase midwives use to describe babies that are fundamentally healthy, but are odd, that are a little off. They call them FLKs, funny looking kids. And for me, the Rolex Submariner is an FLK. It's just not right. The bezel doesn't match the dial. The hands don't match the indices. The text is just huge. And it's just like every couple of years, they just randomly add more. And by the way, it's a complete crapshoot as to what font or typeface they'll use, and they never try and rationalize it and make it all the same. And some of the fonts are just downright ugly. And don't get me started on the gauche over branding and you're like stamping your name on the watch head 20 something times. It's just, as I say, it's just, none of that is terminal. None of that makes the watch horrible, but it's just a bit not right. Okay, this last question I deliberately left to last in case anyone made it this far. BJJ Rhino asked the question, how many chickens do you need to kill an elephant? It could be as little as one. The ancient Greeks found that, or they felt that the rooster, which is a kind of chicken, I suppose, was the most fearsome of all animals, was a very scary beast. They often used them as guard animals, and there are stories of roosters seeing off lions. So perhaps if they could see off a lion, they could see off an elephant. Maybe the elephant panics, runs into a swamp, drowns. There you go, could be one. If we want to be a bit more active, maybe we're going to use chickens. They don't eat them, they don't inhale them, but we're not likely to get an allergic reaction, but we could just plain old everyday crush an elephant with chickens. Now, I did a little bit of research. Apparently, a elephant can carry a quarter of its body weight and not experience any discomfort or long-term injury. We don't want our elephant to be comfortable. We want to kill it. So what if we made the elephant walk around carrying its full body weight in chickens? I reckon we'd get that elephant after a couple of days. Average elephant weighs about 7,000 kilos. Average chicken weighs 2 and a bit kilos. So I'm thinking you need something around 3,000 chickens would probably do it. 3,500 chickens, and I'm confident you could kill that elephant in a couple of days. So yeah, I'm going to go with 3,500 chickens are needed to kill an elephant. How you rustle them all up, put them in containers, get them on the back of the elephant, that's over to you, Rhino. Okay, so anyway, that's me, Pete McConville. This is my channel, and I'm answering your questions. If you would like me to answer your questions next time, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the little notification button, watch what goes on the community tab of my channel. If you do those, you should get a notification, and you'll see the next time I ask for questions. Hope, for those of you who asked questions, hope I gave you answers that were okay. If not, I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments below. I'll see you later. Bye.